my ex's new boyfriend screamed at. My 9-year-old over a dropped backpack. So I installed a $50 camera and took my kids back. 2 months later, the judge made him homeless. I need to get this out because I've been holding it together for months, and I think if I don't write it down somewhere, I'm going to lose it entirely. Not in a dramatic screaming at the sky kind of way, just in that quiet, exhausting way where you realize you've been clenching your jaw for 6 weeks straight, your shoulders are practically glued to your ears, and your dentist asks if everything's okay at home because you're grinding your molars to dust. So here's the deal. Here is exactly how I navigated the darkest period of my life. My name's Marcus. I'm 35 years old. I work as a fleet maintenance coordinator for a massive regional courier company just outside of Indianapolis. Basically, my entire professional life revolves around making sure giant delivery vans don't fall apart while going 70 miles an hour on the interstate. I diagnose strange engine problems. I order specialized parts. I schedule preventative repairs. And I keep meticulous, undeniable logs of every single thing that happens in my garage. It's not a glamorous job. Nobody is making a movie about fleet maintenance, but it pays decently. It provides good insurance. And I am exceptionally good at it. I've been there for 8 years, and my brain is permanently wired to look for patterns, identify broken systems, and document the fix. Keep that in mind. It becomes very important later. My ex-wife, Sarah, and I split up about 3 years ago. There was no huge, dramatic blowout. There was no secret affair. No hidden gambling debt. No screaming matches in the front yard. We just stopped working. You know that terrifying thing where you're sitting across from someone at a restaurant, the food arrives, and you both suddenly realize you have absolutely nothing left to talk about, but neither of you wants to be the one to say it out loud? That was us for about 1.5 years before we finally called it quits. I remember the exact Saturday it ended. We were both in the living room. She was endlessly scrolling on her phone. I was blankly staring at a college football game I didn't care about. And our son, Leo, asked us to play a board game with him. We both said, "In a minute, buddy." This is what we've turned into. 2 strangers sharing a mortgage, a Wi-Fi password, and a grocery list. We did the whole divorce through a mediator. We kept it incredibly clean. We agreed on a strict 50/50 custody split of our 2 kids, Leo, who is 9 now, and Mia, who just turned 7. I moved out and found a 3-bedroom rental house about 12 minutes away from Sarah's place. It was nothing fancy at all. Faded tan vinyl siding, a tiny fenced-in backyard, a detached garage that smelled faintly of old motor oil. But it had a surprisingly great kitchen, and most importantly, it had enough room for both of the kids to have their own dedicated bedrooms. It worked. And honestly, for the first 2.5 years, the arrangement worked flawlessly. I had the kids Sunday night through Thursday morning. She had them Thursday after school through Sunday evening. We alternated major holidays without a single argument. Our communication was almost exclusively through one of those court-approved co-parenting apps. Short, concise messages. Pickup times, pediatrician appointments, report card grades, soccer practice schedules. It was strictly businesslike, but it was highly respectful. I never ever had a problem with Sarah as a co-parent. She was solid. She loved the kids. Then, about 8 months ago, everything shifted. She started dating someone new. I found out through Leo, actually. He mentioned it super casually one night while we were eating tacos at the dinner table. He said his mom's new friend Trent was at the house a lot, and that Trent drove a really loud, big truck. I didn't press him on it. Kids should never, ever feel like they're being aggressively interrogated about what happens at the other parent's house. That's a hard boundary I've always kept. So I just smiled, handed him another napkin, said something like, "Oh, that's cool, buddy," and immediately changed the subject to his favorite video game. I'll be totally straight with you. I genuinely did not care that Sarah was dating. Honestly, I'd been seeing someone casually for a few months myself at the time. It didn't work out. But that's a different story for a different day. Sarah's personal life was absolutely none of my business, as long as it didn't negatively affect my kids. And at first, it didn't seem to. But about 4 months into her new relationship, things started shifting in my children. It was tiny, almost imperceptible stuff at first. Leo started getting incredibly quiet during our drop-offs. Not a grumpy, upset quiet. More like a highly calculated, careful quiet. like he was meticulously picking his words to avoid triggering a landmine. Mia started asking to stay at my house on days she was scheduled to go to her mom's. She didn't throw massive tantrums or cry. She'd just casually stand by the front door, look down at her shoes, and say, "Can I just stay here tonight, Daddy?" In this heartbreakingly soft, tiny voice. And when I gently explained that tonight was Mommy's night and we had to follow the schedule, she'd just nod, her shoulders would slump, and she'd go get her little pink backpack without arguing, which honestly bothered me 100 times more than if she'd thrown a screaming fit on the floor. I started paying much closer attention to their body language. When I'd buckle them into their car seats on Thursday mornings, or whenever Sarah pulled into my driveway to pick them up, I noticed Leo would get completely stiff. His shoulders would tense up so high they practically touched his ears. He used to roll the window down and enthusiastically wave goodbye to me every single time they drove away. Now, he just stared straight ahead at the dashboard, completely frozen. Mia would get incredibly clingy right before I handed her off. She'd wrap her arms around my leg and refuse to let go until the absolute last possible second. One time, she gripped my hand so tightly in the driveway that I could feel her little fingernails digging sharply through my thick leather work gloves. And there were other deeply concerning things too. Leo completely stopped talking about what happened at his mom's house. It used to be that he'd come back to my house on Sunday nights bursting with stories. They went to the playground, they watched a Marvel movie, Mia spilled grape juice on the rug. Whatever. Normal, chaotic kid stuff. Now, he'd walk through my front door, take off his shoes, go straight to his bedroom, and quietly pull the door shut. He's 9 years old. 9-year-old boys don't quietly close their bedroom doors in the middle of the afternoon unless something is very, very wrong. Mia started carrying her ratty old stuffed giraffe everywhere again, a toy she had completely outgrown and abandoned in the back of her closet over a year earlier. She'd clutch it in the car, at the dinner table, sitting on the couch. It was like a security blanket she suddenly desperately needed back to survive the day. One night, this was maybe late October, Leo was doing his math homework at the kitchen table, chewing on the end of his pencil. I was washing dishes. I asked him how things were going at Mom's house. Not in a leading, interrogating way, just casual dad talk. He didn't look up from his worksheet. He just muttered, "Fine." But then, after a few agonizing seconds of silence, he stopped writing, looked up at me with these big, tired eyes, and asked, "Dad, does Trent live with us now?" I dried my hands on a towel, kept my face perfectly neutral, and told him I didn't know. I asked him why he was asking. He looked back down at his paper and whispered, "Because he's always there. And he gets mad a lot." I felt my stomach physically drop into my shoes. My heart rate spiked, but I forced my voice to stay calm and level. I asked him what he meant by mad. He just shrugged his small shoulders and said, like, loud mad. That was it. He immediately went back to his math problems, completely shutting down, and I knew better than to push it. I spent the next 48 hours going back and forth in my head, driving myself insane trying to figure out what to do. I thought about texting Sarah directly. I thought about gently asking Leo more questions. I thought about a dozen different aggressive confrontations. But here's the brutal reality of being a divorced dad in the family court system. You have to be incredibly, painstakingly careful. If you say the wrong thing, if you push too hard without proof, if you come off as a jealous, controlling, bitter ex-husband, suddenly you are the problem. The court looks at you like a nuisance. I'd seen it happen to 2 different guys at my garage. One wrong emotional move, and the entire narrative flips against you. So, I did exactly what I do at work when a delivery truck keeps coming back to the bay, with the same mysterious engine misfire, and nobody can figure out why. I stopped guessing, and I started documenting. I started keeping a log. Dates. Exact times. Weather conditions. Detailed observations of body language. Things the kids said. Written down word for word in quotation marks. Subtle behavioral shifts I noticed before and after drop-offs. I kept it all in a cheap, black and white marbled composition notebook I hid in my bedside drawer. Old school. No digital apps, no cloud storage that could be hacked or subpoenaed out of context. Just a dollar store notebook and a blue ballpoint pen. My buddy Dave at the garage saw me furiously writing in it during our lunch break one Tuesday and jokingly asked if I was starting a diary. I told him to shut up, mind his own business, and eat his turkey sandwich. Around the first week of November, I made a tactical decision. I went to the hardware store and bought a Ring doorbell camera, along with a second wireless Ring stick-up camera. I spent a Saturday afternoon meticulously installing them at my rental house. I put the doorbell cam on the front porch, perfectly framing the walkway and the immediate driveway. I mounted the stick-up camera high on the corner of the detached garage, angling it down to cover the entire street view and the rest of the driveway. My logic was purely practical. All drop-offs and pickups happened directly in my driveway. If something was going on, if this guy was losing his temper, I wanted it on high-definition video with crisp audio. Now, let me be crystal clear about my intentions. I was absolutely not trying to spy on Sarah's private life. I wasn't recording anything inside her house. I wasn't tracking her car with an AirTag, nothing creepy or illegal like that. My cameras were firmly mounted on my leased property, pointed explicitly at my own driveway and my own front yard. It was 100% legal. To ensure my hands were completely clean, I even mentioned it to Sarah in our co-parenting app that same night. I sent a brief, boring message that read, "Hey, just installed some basic security cameras at the house. For your information, been a string of package thefts in the neighborhood lately." She replied 20 minutes later, "Okay, thanks for the heads up." That was it. I had established a paper trail of consent and notification. For the first 2 weeks, absolutely nothing happened. It was agonizingly normal. Sarah would pull up in her sedan, the kids would grab their backpacks, I'd wave from the porch, and they'd leave. Or I'd walk them out to her car, buckle Mia in, she'd drive off, and I'd go back inside. Trent, the boyfriend, wasn't present for a single one of those exchanges. Then came the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Update 1. Sarah pulled up to my house to get the kids for the long holiday weekend, but she wasn't the one driving. Trent was. He was driving this massive, lifted, silver pickup truck, the exact kind of pristine, shiny truck that is way too clean to have ever hauled a single piece of lumber or driven on a dirt road. Sarah was sitting silently in the passenger seat. I walked the kids out to the driveway, carrying their duffel bags. And that's when I saw Trent open his door and step out. It was the first time I'd ever seen the guy in person. He was stocky, maybe 5'10", with a tight buzz cut and a pair of those aggressive wraparound sunglasses pushed up on top of his head. Even though it was overcast and barely 40 degrees outside, he radiated that specific, toxic energy. You know the exact type of guy I'm talking about. The guy who walks into a room and immediately needs every single person to acknowledge his presence. The guy who stands way too close to you, talks entirely too loud, and aggressively laughs at his own terrible jokes. He didn't say a single word to me. He didn't even make eye contact. He just stood by the bed of his truck with his thick arms crossed over his chest, puffing himself out like he was a bouncer at a terrible nightclub nobody was trying to get into. I kept my face blank, loaded the kids' bags into the back seat, and tried to read the atmosphere. Sarah wouldn't make eye contact with me either. She was staring down at her lap, furiously scrolling on her phone, looking incredibly tense. Fine, I thought. Whatever. I don't need to be best friends with the guy. I'm not trying to invite them in for coffee. But then, as Leo was climbing into the tall back seat of the truck, the strap of his backpack caught on the door latch. The bag slipped off his shoulder, hit the concrete driveway, and the zipper busted open. A couple of normal kid things spilled out: a blue plastic folder, a handful of crayons, his metal water bottle that clattered loudly against the pavement. Before I could even bend my knees to help my son pick his things up, Trent snapped. He didn't just raise his voice, he yelled. And I mean he screamed, projecting his voice right into Leo's face, standing in the middle of my driveway. He roared, "Are you kidding me? Pick that garbage up right now. You're always dropping your crap everywhere. What the hell is wrong with you?" The sheer volume of it echoed off my garage. Leo instantly froze. He just stood there, completely paralyzed, his eyes wide with pure terror, staring at the crayons on the ground. Mia physically shrank back, pressing her small body flat against the side of the truck door, clutching her stuffed giraffe to her chest. I slowly straightened my posture and locked eyes with Trent. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. The adrenaline spiked so hard my hands started to shake. Trent stared right back at me, his chin jutted out, looking at me like he was desperately daring me to say something, daring me to throw a punch. And God, every single fiber of my being wanted to oblige him. I wanted to close the distance between us, grab him by the collar of his jacket, and tell him that if he ever raised his voice at my son again, I would bury him under his own pristine truck. But I didn't. I forced my hands into my jacket pockets so he couldn't see my knuckles turning white. I took a deep breath, knelt down on the concrete, calmly helped Leo gather his scattered crayons, placed the water bottle back in the side pocket, and zipped the bag shut. I put my hand firmly on Leo's trembling shoulder, looked him in the eye, and said in the softest, safest voice I could manage, "You're totally fine, buddy. It's just a backpack. Accidents happen." Then I slowly stood up and looked directly at Sarah. She was still sitting in the passenger seat, staring rigidly straight ahead through the windshield, like she was desperately trying to become invisible. She didn't say a single word to defend her son. She didn't even flinch. I closed the heavy truck door. Trent scoffed, got back into the driver's seat, and they sped off, spinning the tires slightly on the asphalt. I walked back inside my empty, quiet house, locked the door, sat down on my couch in the dark, and replayed the incident in my head about 50 times, feeling sick to my stomach. Then I pulled out my phone and checked the Ring app. Both cameras caught every single second of it. The garage camera got the wide angle, showing Trent's aggressive posture. The doorbell camera caught the entire interaction perfectly. Crystal clear, high-definition audio. Trent's red face, his screaming voice, Leo freezing up in terror, Mia shrinking away, Sarah doing absolutely nothing. All of it. I immediately saved the clips. I downloaded them directly to my laptop. I backed them up onto a secure USB flash drive. I emailed the files to my own private email address, so there would be a permanent, indisputable digital timestamp. Then, I pulled out my black and white notebook and wrote down every single agonizing detail. The exact time, the weather, the exact words Trent screamed, the exact way my kids reacted. I spent that entire Thanksgiving weekend completely alone. I sat in my quiet house, eating leftover turkey sandwiches over the sink, watching old college football games on mute, and staring at the wall, agonizing over whether my kids were safe. I felt like a failure, but I knew I needed a pattern, not just one isolated incident, to make a judge care. December arrived, and for the first couple of weeks, things were quiet. Sarah did most of the pickups by herself. Trent showed up twice, but he stayed inside the running truck both times and didn't interact with the kids at all. I meticulously noted every single one of those mundane drop-offs in my notebook anyway. Dates, times, who was present, what was said, what wasn't said. You document the baseline so the deviations stand out. Then came December 19th. Sarah pulled up, and Trent was driving again. It was freezing, light snow on the ground. This time, as Mia was walking away from my porch toward the truck, she tripped on the edge of the concrete walkway. You know how 7-year-olds are in heavy winter boots. They trip over oxygen. She fell onto her knees and started crying. Not a dramatic, screaming tantrum. Just that quiet, pathetic whimper where her bottom lip pokes out and tears well up in her eyes because her knees stung. Trent threw his door open, stepped out into the cold, and instead of asking if she was okay, he pointed a thick finger at her. His exact words, perfectly captured on the Ring audio, were, "Knock it off and get in the truck right now. Stop crying. We don't have time for this dramatic nonsense." She's 7 years old. Her knees were scraped. I didn't say a word to him. I walked over, picked Mia up in my arms, wiped the tears off her freezing cheeks, told her she was a tough cookie, and carried her all the way to the truck myself. Trent was standing there, his jaw clenched, radiating anger. I carefully placed her into her car seat, buckled her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I love you. See you Sunday, sweetie." Then I turned my back on Trent and walked inside without giving him a single glance. Saved the clip. Downloaded it. Backed it up. Documented the exact quote in the notebook. I desperately wanted to call Sarah that night and scream at her. I really did. But I knew exactly how that would play out. If I confronted her directly, one of two things would happen. Either she'd immediately get defensive, accuse me of overreacting, and tip Trent off that I was building a case against him, causing him to hide his abuse better. Or she'd secretly agree with me, cry on the phone, but change absolutely nothing because she was clearly terrified of standing up to him. Neither of those outcomes protected my kids. So, I swallowed my pride, kept my mouth firmly shut, and kept logging. Christmas Day was excruciating. I had the kids for Christmas morning, per our ironclad custody agreement. It was the best morning of the year. Just like always, I got Leo this massive, complex model airplane kit he'd been begging for. the kind with 300 tiny plastic pieces and superglue that takes weeks to build. I got Mia a massive set of those professional art markers she loves, the ones that immediately bleed through the paper and stain the table, which I discovered 30 minutes later. We made chocolate chip pancakes, used way too much syrup, and laughed. It was perfect. But that afternoon, when I loaded them into my car to drive them over to Sarah's house for the second half of the holiday, the mood shifted instantly. I could physically feel Leo tense up in the back seat. He stopped talking completely. He just stared out the window at the passing snow. When we pulled into Sarah's driveway, I walked them up to the front door. I rang the bell. Trent opened the door. He stood right in the center of the doorway, physically blocking the entrance, looking down at us like he owned the property. He didn't say Merry Christmas. He didn't say hello. He didn't say thank you for dropping them off. He just glared at me, stepped slightly to the side, and motioned for the kids to hurry up and get inside. As Leo walked past him into the house, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder at me. Just once. And the look of absolute silent desperation and betrayal on my 9-year-old son's face is something that will haunt me until the day I die. I couldn't protect him. I had to leave him there. I drove back to my empty house, pulled into the garage, turned off the engine, and just sat in the dark front seat of my car for 45 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my hands cramped, trying not to break down. The final straw happened on January 5th. Sarah dropped the kids off at my place after school. As Leo was getting out of the back seat, carrying his heavy winter boots because he was wearing his sneakers, Trent leaned over from the passenger seat and yelled through the open window. The camera caught the audio perfectly, he snarled. And next time, don't leave your muddy boots in the damn hallway, or I'm throwing them straight in the garbage. You hear me? Over a pair of winter boots. I didn't react. I calmly walked the kids inside, locked the door, and made a massive pot of spaghetti, Leo's favorite. We had a great quiet dinner. I read Mia a story, tucked them both into bed, and made sure their nightlights were on. Once the house was dead silent, I walked out to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, pulled out my battered composition notebook, and reviewed the 4 distinct video clips and the pages of detailed behavioral logs from the last 2 months. I closed the notebook. I was done waiting. It was time to fix the broken system. Update 2. The very next morning, during my lunch break at the garage, I drove downtown and walked into the office of a family law attorney named Thomas Vance. He came highly recommended by a senior mechanic at my job who had gone through a brutal, drawn-out custody nightmare a few years prior. I sat down in Thomas's office, in this massive leather chair that squeaked loudly every time I breathed, and I laid my entire arsenal out on his mahogany desk. The black and white notebook, the USB drive, the printed, time-stamped emails. I explained the 4 separate incidents. I detailed the severe regression in my kids' behavior, the closed bedroom doors, the stuffed animal, the flinching, the silence. Thomas Vance didn't interrupt me once. He plugged the USB drive into his laptop and watched all 4 Ring camera clips, back to back, in complete silence. I sat across from him, my heart hammering in my chest, trying desperately not to read his stoic facial expressions. When the 4th clip ended, the one about throwing Leo's shoes in the garbage, Thomas slowly closed the laptop, took off his reading glasses, placed them neatly on the desk, looked me dead in the eye, and asked a single question. How soon do you want to file the emergency motion? I told him I wanted to file it yesterday. He leaned back and explained the grim reality of family court to me. He said that in our state, if you want to file an emergency modification of a standing custody order, you have to definitively prove that the children's current living environment poses a severe, immediate risk to their physical or emotional well-being. He said most parents walk into court with nothing but emotional hearsay, screaming, she said, which judges absolutely hate. But you, Thomas said, tapping his pen against my dollar store notebook. You brought me a documented pattern. You have 4 specific incidents of verbal abuse and intimidation spanning 8 weeks. You have exact dates, exact times, verbatim quotes, and indisputable high-definition video evidence to corroborate every single word written in this log. You didn't react aggressively. You didn't send angry, threatening texts to your ex. You just quietly gathered undeniable proof. This isn't one bad day, Marcus. This is a pattern of emotional abuse. And judges destroy patterns. He warned me that it would be expensive. He quoted me a retainer fee that made my eyes water and my stomach clench. But I pulled out my credit card and signed the legal agreement without a second of hesitation. You can't put a price tag on your kid's safety. We filed the emergency motion for full physical custody on January 21st. Now, here is the part that completely shocked me. I fully expected Sarah to fight it with everything she had. I expected her to hire a vicious bulldog lawyer, file a counter motion, and try to paint me as an obsessive, paranoid, controlling ex-husband who illegally used hidden cameras to stalk her and manipulate the court. I spent 3 days mentally bracing myself for absolute warfare. What I got instead was a phone call. Sarah called me at 9 p.m. the night after she was officially served with the court papers. When I answered, she wasn't yelling. She wasn't defensive. She was sobbing, hysterically, uncontrollably crying. She choked out, "I'm so sorry." I know. I just listened. Over the next 30 minutes, she confessed everything. She told me that things with Trent had gotten significantly worse behind closed doors. She admitted that he had become increasingly aggressive and unpredictable inside the house. He wasn't hitting them, but he was slamming doors, throwing plates into the sink, and screaming at the kids over minor infractions like spilling water or leaving toys out. She confessed that Leo had started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 4 years old. She told me Mia was waking up screaming from night terrors almost every single night. She said she had been desperately wanting to break up with Trent and kick him out for weeks, but she was paralyzed by fear. She was terrified of how he would react. She wasn't just scared for the kids anymore. She was physically afraid for her own safety. I sat there in my kitchen, gripping the phone, listening to the mother of my children sob into the receiver. Part of me, the angry, vindictive part, wanted to scream at her. I wanted to demand to know why she didn't come to me sooner. Why she sat in the passenger seat like a coward while this monster verbally abused our son in my driveway. But a much bigger part of me, the part that has spent a decade diagnosing critical failures and repairing them before the whole vehicle catches fire, took over. I kept my voice completely steady, devoid of anger, and said, "Sarah, we are going to figure this out. But right now, the kids have to come first. They cannot be in that house while he is there. You know that," she agreed. She didn't fight the custody modification at all. Her lawyer and Thomas Vance worked out the strict terms over the next few days. I would take full primary physical custody immediately. Sarah would get supervised visitation on weekends. Not because she was inherently an evil mother, but because as long as Trent had a key to her house, the court could not legally guarantee the safety of the children. She accepted the terms without a single objection. Honestly, hearing the relief in her voice, I think she was incredibly thankful that I forced her hand and gave her an out. The official court date was set for February 11th to formalize the emergency order. I showed up to the courthouse wearing my best pair of pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt I hadn't worn since a funeral 3 years ago. Thomas had specifically instructed me to look exactly like the dependable, boring, utterly predictable dad that I am. I embraced it. Sarah was already sitting at the respondent's table when I walked in. She looked completely hollowed out, dark circles under her eyes, pale, exhausted. She didn't look angry. She just looked defeated. Her attorney sat next to her, shuffling papers. The hearing was incredibly fast. Thomas Vance was a surgeon. He didn't grandstand. He didn't give a passionate, theatrical speech. He simply presented the facts. He submitted my handwritten behavior log as a supporting exhibit, complete with a typed table of contents and a date index he had his paralegal create. Then, he connected his laptop to the courtroom monitor and played the Ring doorbell footage for the judge. All 4 incidents, back to back, volume turned up. I watched the judge's face intently. She was an older woman, stern, with sharp eyes, the kind of seasoned family court judge who has seen every disgusting manipulative trick in the book and has absolutely zero patience for nonsense. During the first 2 clips, her facial expression didn't change a single millimeter. Stone cold. But on the 3rd clip, the one where Mia tripped on the concrete and Trent told her to stop her dramatic nonsense, I saw the judge's jaw tighten, just a fraction of an inch. When the 4th clip ended, the courtroom was dead silent. You could hear the HVAC system humming in the ceiling. The judge slowly took off her reading glasses, set them on her wooden bench, and looked directly down at Sarah. She asked one single, piercing question. "Ma'am, is this man still residing in your home and in contact with your children?" Sarah stood up, her hands visibly shaking, and said, "No, Your Honor. I ended the relationship the day I was served with these papers." He moved his things out. I changed the locks. Her voice cracked, but she held it together. The judge looked at the video timestamps. She flipped through my meticulous notebook entries. She reviewed the emergency school records Thomas had subpoenaed, which clearly showed a massive dip in Leo's math and reading grades over the last 2 months, alongside 3 separate incidents where Mia had been sent to the school nurse's office complaining of severe stomach aches that had no medical explanation. The physical manifestation of pure anxiety. The judge looked at Sarah's attorney and asked if there was any objection to making the emergency modification permanent. The attorney quietly said, "No, Your Honor." That was it, the gavel fell. The judge granted the modification in full. I was awarded sole physical custody of both Leo and Mia. Sarah was granted supervised visitation every other weekend at a designated family center, with a strict, legally binding step-up plan. If she could prove over the next 6 months that Trent was permanently out of the picture, that she had attended domestic violence counseling, and that her home environment was completely stable, we could revisit standard visitation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pump my fist in the air. I didn't smile. I didn't hug my lawyer. I just sat heavily in my wooden chair and felt my shoulders physically drop for the absolute first time since October. It felt like I had been holding my breath underwater for 4 months, and someone finally pulled me to the surface and told me I was allowed to inhale. Thomas Vance shook my hand in the echoing marble hallway outside the courtroom. He packed his briefcase, looked at me, and said, "You did the exact right thing, Marcus. Most parents let their emotions ruin their case. You let the evidence do the talking." I nodded, thanked him, and paid the rest of my massive invoice. I walked out to the courthouse parking lot, got into my truck, locked the doors, and finally broke down. I sat there for 20 minutes, crying like a baby, completely overwhelmed by the adrenaline leaving my system. I called my mom. She cried on the phone with me. She told me how incredibly proud she was. And she said my dad would have been proud of me too. My dad passed away from a sudden heart attack about 5 years ago. It was a random thing to bring up, but it hit me incredibly hard in that moment because my dad was the exact same kind of man I am. Quiet, steady, meticulously organized. He used to keep a detailed logbook just for the maintenance of his riding lawnmower. I definitely got the notebook habit from him. It's been a little over 2 months since the court ruling. The kids are doing so much better. It's not perfectly magical overnight, but the progress is undeniable. Leo's grades are steadily climbing back up to where they belong. His teacher sent me a glowing email last week saying he absolutely crushed a science quiz on the solar system. I know that sounds trivial, but 3 months ago, this poor kid was so paralyzed by anxiety, he couldn't even finish his basic math homework. He's slowly reverting back into a normal, loud, chaotic, goofy 9-year-old boy. He makes terrible fart jokes at the dinner table. He leaves sharp Lego pieces on the carpet for me to step on at 2 in the morning. He joined a local flag football league last month, and honestly, he is absolutely terrible at it. He drops the ball constantly. But he runs around the turf with this massive, goofy grin on his face, totally fearless, and that is literally the only thing I care about. I sit in my cheap folding camping chair on the sidelines every Saturday morning, freezing, drinking terrible thermos coffee, and I just watch my son be a kid again. Mia is sleeping through the night much more consistently. She still has a rough nightmare every once in a while, but they are becoming rare. Best of all, she is back to being her endlessly chatty, exhausting little self. She talks non-stop from the moment she wakes up until her head hits the pillow. She tells me every single detail about what she ate for lunch, what her best friend said at recess, a weird-shaped cloud she saw on the walk home, and a deeply complex theory about why purple is objectively a better color than blue. I miss that noise so much. The stuffed giraffe is back in her closet where it belongs. Sarah and I are on decent, functional terms. It's not great, and there is a massive mountain of unspoken trauma and resentment between us that I don't know if we will ever fully address, but she consistently shows up for her supervised visits at the family center. She is highly engaged and loving with the kids when she's there, and the court supervisors have had absolutely zero negative issues to report. Losing primary custody of her children was the brutal wake-up call she desperately needed to break out of her toxic fog. I genuinely hope she continues to heal, for the kids' sake. As for Trent, the abusive boyfriend, I have absolutely no idea where he is, and I couldn't care less. What I know for a fact is that he is legally barred from being anywhere near my children, and he is out of our lives permanently. Sarah mentioned in passing during a phone call that he tried to aggressively contact her a few days after he was kicked out, demanding his security deposit back or something, and she immediately blocked his number and threatened to call the police. That's all I needed to hear. I guess the ultimate realization I keep coming back to is this. Nobody was going to swoop in and save my kids except me. Sarah couldn't do it because she was trapped in a cycle of fear and couldn't see her way out. The school didn't know what was happening behind closed doors. The kids were too young and terrified to articulate the abuse. The burden fell entirely on me. And the terrifying truth is, I almost didn't do anything because I was so desperately afraid of rocking the boat. I was afraid of the biased family court system. I was afraid of being labeled the bitter ex. But here's what I learned, and what I want every single parent reading this to understand. Documenting abuse is not overreacting. Installing legal security cameras on your own property to monitor your driveway is not paranoia. Writing down exact quotes in a dollar store notebook is not being dramatic. Sometimes, being the boring, methodical, emotionless, systematic parent is exactly what your children desperately need you to be to survive. I diagnose broken trucks for a living. I find the failure. I document the exact symptoms. I order the necessary replacement parts, and I execute the repair. It turns out that the exact same methodical approach works when the thing that is critically broken is your custody agreement. I still have that black and white composition notebook sitting in my bedside drawer. I haven't had to write a single entry in it in over 9 weeks. That feels incredibly good. One thing I haven't totally figured out yet is how I'm going to explain all of this to Leo when he gets older. He's 9. He knows things drastically changed. He knows he lives with me full-time now, and he knows the visits with Mom are in a weird building with a supervisor, but he doesn't know about the Ring cameras, or the secret notebook, or the emergency court hearing, or any of the intense behind-the-scenes legal warfare. Someday, when he's a teenager, he's going to ask me what really happened. And I honestly don't know what I'm going to say to him. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times, and I still don't have the right words. Maybe I'll just show him the notebook. I'll figure that out when I get there. For now, my kids are safe. They are fast asleep in their own beds. Just down the hallway from me. I can see the faint glow of Leo's nightlight slipping under his doorframe. The house is quiet, the doors are locked, and the cameras are rolling. That is enough. That is everything. If you are a dad going through something similar or a mom, it really doesn't matter. Just document everything. Keep your emotions in check. Be patient. Be boring. Let the abusive party hang themselves with their own actions. The legal system is agonizingly slow, incredibly frustrating, and terrifying. But it does work if you hand the judge an undeniable, bulletproof pattern of evidence. Would I do it all again? Every single agonizing second of it, without a single moment of hesitation.